you just hit tab and it's done for you. I didn't even know, what's funny is I didn't know this function existed, filter var, where you can actually validate email addresses just using this simple function. This is just what Copilot gave me. So it's pretty cool, and it works amazing with small blocks of code in PHP, JavaScript, and things that are more advanced like regular expressions or serverless functions. But I wonder how it works in Magento. So it can generate a namespace for you pretty quickly, which isn't that impressive, but it can also create a controller, kind of. You notice how it's extending app action, which is not really the right way to do things anymore. And when you try to type out a function, it sort of, let's say we wanted to return a JSON response with a customer's first name. So I typed in return JSON response with current customer's name. And it sort of breaks down at this point. And it's probably been your experience so far with AI. So notice the usage of Object Manager and how it's setting the header and the body right on the response object. So that's really not how you want to code things. But the crazy thing is it still did work. It gave me my name when I'm logged in on my account. I did have to tab through a few options to get this to work. Other times it failed miserably. So I'd say GitHub Copilot is great, but not really so much for Magento. It's just too complex, at least writing out entire files or multiple functions of code. Things just start to break down really quickly. So I'm sure you've all heard of ChatGPT. So it's one of, if not the biggest advancement of AI to date. And if you don't know what it means, it's pretty much GPT stands for General Purpose Training. So it's pretty much an AI that can answer questions about anything and everything. You feed it a question, give it a prompt, or you can instruct it to do anything at all, and it really does anything. And I do mean anything. So it is based on OpenAI's API, which is GPT-3, and it's been referred to as 3.5 as well. It's all the same pretty much. And there's pretty much just a chat box where you type in a question, instructions, or any prompt, and it just answers. So I told it, write a song about Meet Magento, Florida in the style of Snoop Dogg. And it did. And notice how I didn't give it a rule set or any data, nothing. It just inferred Magento's an e-commerce platform and framework. And it even made it rhyme. So it's very on point, too. Kind of funny. And it not only wrote those two verses, it wrote a bridge, a chorus, an outro. And notice how it even referenced the sunshine state in here. It's just, it did this without any intervention at all. And it's just mind-blowingly good if you ask me. But so I wonder how does it work with Magento code? But if you haven't seen this prompt, you can really tell it to act in a certain way, and it'll really do whatever you say. So for example, this prompt instructing it to act as a Linux terminal. Pretty much you give it any kind of a command, and it'll output the result of what would actually run within a Linux kernel. And yeah, it does things like output the result of a Docker container. It returns a result of pinging a website. It's important to note that it actually can't connect to the internet, though. So the result that shows here, it's actually not pinging a computer. It's just taking its data set that it has access to and it infers what the result would be, which is really, really interesting, even though it looks real. So let's go back to this code. It definitely doesn't follow any best practices. It works, but it's not really coded that well. And we're even lucky that it works. So how can ChatGPT help us? So I typed a prompt of what I want it to do. I told it, review this code and make it follow Magento 2's best practices and coding guidelines. And added a couple line breaks. I pasted in this code. And here's what happened. It imported classes for me. It created private properties. It initialized the values with dependency injection. It assigned the variables to properties, and then it also called the parent constructor. And it added doc blocks of the parameters, and it actually returned a JSON object right on the execute method. So you can tell it's a lot better than the Copilot code. And we still have the same output as we did before. But now there's no usage of object manager. It's using a proper result JSON object. And this will generally pass a code review at this point. And I didn't really have to do anything. But it would be nice if we also had a summary of the changes. So I asked it, can I get a brief summary of the changes that were made that improved this code and why they were made? And it replied, the following changes were made to improve the code and follow M2's coding guidelines and best practices. And it actually summarized all the changes, including the creation of classes, and rather than it being fetched through Object Manager, the constructor being used to inject dependencies automatically. The type hint was added to the execute method and to indicate the response object, and the result JSON object was used in the response data instead of setting the header and body directly. And it also told us why it makes it more maintainable, reliable, easier to understand and test. And by using dependency injection, the code is more flexible and can easily be reused in different contexts, and that it's returning a result JSON object rather than, because it's the best practice for returning JSON responses. So that's pretty crazy, and it actually explained it much more succinctly than I probably ever would. And there's another tool out there called What the Diff. It's a tool created by the Beyond Code team. If you're familiar with them at all, they're really popular with the Laravel crowd. And the output is similar to ChatGPT's output, but it's more concise, and it runs right within GitHub. So this could be super useful if you're working in a team and handling code reviews. And going back to ChatGPT, notice that I didn't provide any context to this question. So this is one of the craziest things, that it can remember what you typed and it keeps the context from one prompt to the next. So how far can this go? So let's take things a step further. I asked it to refactor the code to use PHP 8's constructor property promotion. And it outputted the proper refactoring using promoted properties. The code is a lot better, but it's still not perfect. If you're a Magento developer, you probably know what's next. I asked it to refactor this code to implement an interface rather than extending the action class. And it implemented the correct interface, this HTTP GET action interface, and I didn't even tell it to. So it knew what class, it implied what class or what interface it should implement. So right now, this code follows Magento 2's best practices. It's properly coded, and it's up to date in PHP 8. And if you think about this, it's really crazy because I didn't write any of this code. This tells us that prompting will be just super important in the future, and learning how to use it will very, very much be crucial. So as you can tell, so far I've mainly been talking about ChatGPT, and it's because I think it's the most interesting and useful piece of tech, and it has very low overhead, so it's very easy to use. But it does suffer some disadvantages, which also applies to other AI tools. So the first is that you are dependent on the service. So when you rely on a web service, you're really at the mercy of the service. During the research for this talk, I was at constant capacity issues. As you know, it's been a really popular tool. So if it was down, I really couldn't work on the talk. So if it's down and you're depending on it for your code, you may not be able to code without it. So it does create that dependency that I really don't like at the moment. But if you think, it does remind me of a lot of the times in the early 2000s when we started switching to remote development environments. And we were relying on the internet being up, and it did go down quite a bit. So right now, we don't have to worry about that. It seems like internet service is always up. So I do think this will be improved over time, and it will probably be a non-issue, but you still are dependent on this service. So here's the actual speed of ChatGPT. Sometimes it's slower, sometimes it's faster, but you need to type a question. You have to wait for a queue, wait for a response, lots of waiting. It's a reason I didn't use ChatGPT, like real life coding examples in this real time, because it's just very kind of unreliable and it's slow. Sometimes you need to type, walk away, get a coffee, come back and see the result. So it is very slow. Here's a tool that I created called Beeline. It just generates, you give it a keyword and hit enter, and it generates for you right away. So it's tons faster. It doesn't rely on the internet. It follows best practices by default. So there are tools out there that are much better than some of these AI tools in ChatGPT, but don't know for how long, because there are advancements happening really quickly. So it is also what I call an all-knowing idiot. So hopefully the future AI overlords don't kill me for this, but I actually asked it for promoted properties quite a few times, and it gave me the response without it quite often. So it's a little bit of a mix of a genius and being an idiot. So the tools will also act like they know, and they'll act like they know it all, and they'll give you a response very confidently, knowing it's correct, but they really don't know if it's correct or not. And you'll notice in this response, it also says, I may miss some details or make assumptions. So this will improve over time, but it is something you got to be aware of, that the result that you always, or that you get back, may not always be correct. And yeah, things didn't go that smoothly in the creation of this presentation. So here's a response where I asked it to refactor it using promoted properties, and it just didn't do it. So yeah, it's too kind of slow and inconsistent results, and it didn't listen to me half the time. So another reason why I couldn't do it live. And sometimes you have to give it more context in the prompt. So this is going to be an important factor when it comes to prompting. It was notoriously bad at PHP 8's constructor property promotion, which drove me crazy because it's my favorite feature of the language. It's probably because it lacked constructor property promotion in the code examples or the data set that it was trained on. It just randomly scrapes really the entire internet, and it just implies it tries to figure out what you are meaning to ask it and what it can reply. So it can get easily confused. And notice that in this prompt, I also added this extra sentence that this defines visibility within the constructor rather than defining it before the constructor. And that's actually when I got a correct response really quickly, all the time. It has a number of advantages, though, for sure. Certain tasks computers do way better than humans. So you think anything that's confusing for you to do, like setting up a cron tab or cron job, typing out a regex, input check, validation check, simplifying code, running pair programming and code reviews, it does it so fast, and it just saves a ton of time with certain tasks, and it'll keep only getting faster and faster with time. So look for the speed to increase, I would say 100x over time. It's just going to be almost immediate. Copilot is very fast right now. It's much faster than ChatGPT, so I would see something like that happening in the future. The data sets will continue getting much larger, and it'll be even trained on different data sets for specific industries. And I see different UI and implementations. So this is a quote from a popular article that the future of programming is going to be writing prompts. So it's just you're going to ask GPT for in natural language what you want it to do, and it'll do it. And I think in the future, it says down here you don't even need to code. It'll produce the right answer for you. It's pretty much, you picture PHP Storm having an input box and you tell it what to do and hit OK, and it may create files for you, populate all the files and write it. It could just save you a ton of time even if it's not completely correct. So it's pretty crazy. Common argument is AI is stupid. It is an all-knowing idiot, but not all idiots are stupid. So all idiots aren't necessarily stupid. Alan Thompson is the leading expert in AI right now, and he was actually a former chairman of Mensa, and he estimated that the IQ of GPT-3 would be about 150, and ChatGPT would have an IQ of 147. So that's crazy. It's in a 99.9 percentile, so probably smarter than almost everybody in this room, maybe everybody. It also passed the US bar exam, a CPA exam, and a US medical licensing exam recently. So it's just crazy how smart it is. And I was challenging this. I wondered if it's smart with Magento too. So I fed it a list of sample questions from an Adobe Commerce exam practice test or practice questions that I found. And I sent it 9, 10, 12 questions, and it got everyone right. It was 100%. And not only did it answer it, it explained why the answer is correct. It does know everything. I'd say it's definitely a Magento master at tests. But we saw how it did in coding as well. So we know that testing doesn't really give you the result of a real life coder, like how it actually codes in real life. So ChatGPT also appears to be much smarter than GPT-3, but it's not. The most recent version of GPT-3, it's DaVinci 003. It's also referred to as GPT 3.5. It's pretty much the same exact API that ChatGPT uses. So it goes to show you the presence of a UI and just keeping context when you give it prompts, how much more powerful the responses actually can be. What's next? I would look out for GPT-4. It probably won't be as good as it's hyped. It's hyped to be the end-all, be-all of AI. It probably won't be. You're going to be disappointed. It's going to be probably a significant improvement, though. Bard just came out last week. There's DeepMind Sparrow, which is created by Google. That's supposed to be another ChatGPT alternate. And again, I would temper expectations with all this, but it's Wild West. I believe Bard is a system, or not Bard, GPT-3 was integrated with the Bing browser just recently. I just got access to it, but I wasn't able to test it out yet. But now's the time to really get involved. It's the Wild West with all of this. Ask questions, experiment with all of the tools that are available to you, and just play around with things. So a few ways you can get started. Awesome ChatGPT is a cool repo that contains all these different prompts that you can tell it to act like a dream interpreter. You can tell it to, act a certain way, and it'll output specific responses. It's really cool. It gives you an idea of what you can do with it. The OpenAI Cookbook was created. It's an official OpenAI repo that has code examples written in, I believe, mostly JavaScript or Python, but they have examples of talking with the OpenAI API. And learn prompting, I thought it was pretty basic, but it does give you some good starter material of how these prompts actually work and how you can trick it into getting it what you want it to do. So using this sort of awesome ChatGPT, I used one of the examples, and I thought of some cool things you could do. So I actually told it, I want you to act as a Magento CLI script bin Magento. Remember, I didn't feed it any of this data for Magento. I told it I'll just type commands and reply what the command would be if it was executed in the terminal and show me the output. And I told it pretty much don't do anything else. And it's cool. It's just bin Magento sometimes has hard to remember commands. It's kind of like an emulator. So then you can just ask it stuff to do. So I said, create an admin user named Mark Shust, and it spit out that super long line that we never can remember what it requires or entails with all those arguments. And also increasing the admin session lifetime to 30 days. I don't know that config path. I can never remember it, and I never know what 30 days is in seconds. So it just outputted that immediately, pretty much. So it's very neat, and you could build stuff like this just by giving it a prompt. You can download all these, the presentation slides at M.academy/AI. if you wanted to grab that, there's all the links working there. You could just click them and grab it. I'll leave this up a second. Everyone's taking a picture. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, definitely let me know. You can follow me on social media at Mark Shust, just my name, on GitHub, LinkedIn, Twitter, and YouTube. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Mark. So, any questions?
What do you think about merchants using ChatGPT for creating like front-end website content, blog articles, etc.?
Blog articles will always, for the most part, if you just feed it the question, they'll sound like a robot. You'll know that an AI wrote it, and there's also AI detectors that you can paste in code, and it'll tell you if it's written by an AI or not. Now, I did find ways you can actually trick ChatGPT into sounding like a human, and you would never know the difference, and it doesn't sound like a robot at all. So you can. I'd be very wary about the output that it gives you, and using that data exactly verbatim, copy and paste. I don't think that's a good idea. It's not going to be original ideas or content. Again, it's kind of rehashed content from what it finds on the web. So I would use it more for idea generation. For product descriptions, it might be really well, but I would verify the data that is being output by it.
So my question is, if we want to use this today for dev purposes, do we use it for code review? Do we use it for writing some code, like, skeleton or shell of it? What do we use it for?
Yes, pretty much. I would get in and use it for anything. So I actually just put a video up on YouTube last Friday. I actually, in one of my courses that I'm currently working on, I needed to display the layout handles at the bottom of the screen real easily, and I didn't want to install any really complex module. So I asked it, create me a module that can display layout handles at the bottom of the screen and put it in a Magento 2 module. And it got about 80–90% of the code right. It was syntactically pretty good. I didn't have much to review on it. And it actually styled the layout handles to match Luma. And it did that automatically. It's pretty crazy. I don't even know how it came up with that code because I've never seen it. So yeah, that's with code. Code reviews, I think it's great. You can paste in code and tell it to find the bug, or is there a way to optimize the code, and it'll spit it out, and it usually does it immediately, or it might take a human 10–15 minutes of looking at the code to figure it out. And yeah, what the diff tool is fantastic in PRs. I'd highly recommend it because it can summarize really long and advanced PRs. And there is a tool in there where you can actually leave a comment on the PR with what the diff, WTD, and it'll actually rewrite code for you and can merge it in right on GitHub. I've had kind of somewhat bad experiences with it, but I'm sure it's going to improve. It's pretty crazy, yeah.
In researching the talk today, did you look into any of the intellectual property aspects of actually using the code and/or front-end content generated by AI?
That's kind of a gray area. It's, for the most part, we don't know how it gets the data. It's probably similar to asking it to write a blog post. You don't really know where that data is coming from. It's sort of a gray area that really hasn't been delved into yet. And we saw DALL-E is another tool for image generation, which is probably way more dependent on copyrights for graphical assets. Because it's actually using art and graphical assets rather than just text. It only scrapes publicly available data. So I don't know if there's any IP issues as long as it's, unless the code is just commercially available publicly. It's kind of be an odd scenario. So I didn't actually ask it to write Adobe Commerce code. It probably doesn't have access to that code, but who knows what random GitHub profile it's actually scraped that may have commerce code. So you just have to be careful with what it outputs. So I would definitely review everything that it outputs. Don't assume that it's just going to be completely legal and that you can use it.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you so much. Yeah, we need to carve out time for the next, but it was mind-blowing. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, if you have any other questions, you can ask me after.